Up next is our man behind the scenes, Ken Rehor. Ken is a telecommunications professional in California's Silicon Valley, and I'm pretty sure that makes him the hardest working man in show business right now. Ken is also one of the most generous people I've ever met. I don't think the word no is part of Ken's vocabulary, although, Ken, for your sake, I hope it is every once in a while. Ken found ample time to show us the ropes of video conferencing and set up today's event. He is also a talented photographer whose fascination with trains goes back to his dad's pre-war Lionel train set under their Christmas tree in suburban Chicago. As a teenager in the Midwest, Ken received his photographic education from the masters of Western Railroad photography decades before he ever met them. He's going to tell us more about that. Ken, thank you so much for all that you do, and welcome.
Thanks for having me. I'm really thrilled to be here today, and I'm glad to have this opportunity. You know, it's been let's see, I need to take over. Let's see, I need to set myself as presenter now. Okay. Do the behind the scenes here. Okay, let me start this. I'm going to do a little bit of a kind of like more of a show and tell, because I have, you can tell I have some equipment here, some things I want to show you. But so this presentation really started from a couple of things. One is I've been, like many of you, going through boxes and boxes of pictures and negatives and slides and trying to make heads or tails of what I did years ago and scanning them. And at the same time, I was having a conversation with Shirley Berman Steinheimer, and she said, "How did you get started in trains, like in train photography? How did that start?" And so this presentation actually kind of started as an explanation to her, and also a combination of me scanning through old pictures. So I hope you bear with me. This is specifically, as the title says, it's my travels with Steinheimer, Styffe, Benson, Dorn, Kooistra. So many of the photographers that I learned from the pages of magazines and books decades before I met them. I'm very glad that I have met them. So this is I'm gonna give some background. This is me during this era of when I'm gonna mainly talk about this this session. This is 1980. This is the middle of I was a sophomore in high school. My friend Tom took this picture of me while we were waiting to try to capture the westbound at the time San Francisco Zephyr as it ripped through Berwyn, Illinois, where I grew up. I was very fortunate to grow up in suburban Chicago, where I had the BN main line and the Santa Fe main line and IC Illinois Central short lines all nearby within my 10-speed biking access. So my friends and I would go frequently to the tracks to catch what we could, to see what we could, and photograph in the yards. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. What I want to do is I want to start back at the beginning of trying to explain how did I get interested in photography, and then I'm going to really cover this era of when I was really learning photography, and I'm going to have a little bit of a wrap up at the end. So instead of trains, planes, and automobiles, it was really trains, and trains, and it started very early. Here's my dad holding me up at my first birthday. You can see the train on the cake. So trains were always part of my sphere. It was really a fun time growing up with trains, especially my dad's Lionel train set that he got when he was a kid. And it's been under my parents' Christmas tree now. This year was the 78th year. So that had a big influence. That was an incredibly fun time at Christmas time to be able to play with the train. But it was an epic journey on the Santa Fe Super Chief in 1966 when I was 2.5. So my dad, we were living in Chicago. My dad had business in Los Angeles, and so my dad took the entire family to go visit my aunt, and so we all went. And what could possibly be better than an entire family of our entire family riding on the Super Chief in a pleasure dome, looking out at the deserts of Colorado and New Mexico. My brother I'm sitting on my dad's lap. My mom took this picture. So what could be better than this? Well, it does get even better, because here we are in our first class accommodations the next morning going through Cajon Pass. So the deserts of Colorado, New Mexico, and California all in one trip. And that was my first introduction to the deserts, which I completely love now. So trains were, my love of trains was cemented very early on, and this continued on through my childhood. My parents took us to every sort of train event. The one on the lower left is in the Wisconsin Dells. The one in the black and white picture in the middle is my brother and I in a caboose at the Western Electric headquarters in Chicago. Going through pictures, I found snapshots of me with cameras, but it's interesting. The photography, even though I enjoyed cameras, the photography really wasn't the main thing here. It was really trains, and it just continued on. And here's my mom and my brother and I at Christmas. You can see, I just can't believe that my mom had the patience to put up with us putting trains all over the living room, her living room floor at Christmas. But you know, they supported it, and it really had a lifelong impact. Continued train trips. Check out those striped pants I'm wearing on the platform at Berwyn, Illinois. We were getting ready to board the commuter train into Chicago to catch the Denver Zephyr again. And my dad had a business trip in Denver at that time. And then in 1975, we took the Amtrak Southwest Limited at that point. It wasn't the Southwest Chief anymore. And it just continued our love affair of traveling by train. But real trains translated more into model trains, and then translated into model train photography. I started out my Lionel work, my Lionel passion really moved into HO, and these were some of my first model photographs. This was the Tony Kester era of Railroad Model Craftsman magazine. I read an article, I was probably maybe 11 years old, and I read an article about photographing trains and about focus and depth of field. And I didn't understand what the problem was, because everything looked perfectly sharp through the viewfinder of my mom's Kodak 126 Instamatic camera. Of course, when they got the results back, it was like, what the heck is all this about? Why is this all out of focus? So, but that trip to California in 1975 on the Southwest Limited really cemented my my passion for the deserts of New Mexico, Arizona, and California. And I immediately ripped up my model railroad and I completely redid it in a Southwest theme. By the way, that you can see this right here. That's the Lionel, the Ather F7 that's on that train right. That's on the train right there. The train layout. The hobby shop where I frequented in Berwyn was a perfect location, in that it had a perfect view, plate glass windows overlooking. Attributed. I'd love to know who took this picture to give proper credit, but it's a perfect picture that captured what it was like to go into the hobby shop and watch the trains on the CB&Q and the Burlington Northern rip by. The early part of my real railroad photography exploration really started from two of the classic books, Lucius Beebe's Highball and Joe McMillan's Route of the War Bonnets. Those are you have to have those books. Those are just foundational, and they're just so incredibly inspiring. But right below where that arrow is, right in that front window, is where there used to be a big box of all the old magazines people would turn back in when they were done reading them, and they'd sell them for a quarter. And this is where things really changed for me. I found an entire, over a course of a couple of months, I found like the mother lode of railroad photography magazines. First of all, it was Santa Fe, then it was Deserts, and then it was this guy with this funny name, Richard Steinheimer. What's a Steinheimer? But I realized that pictures whenever I saw a great picture in a magazine, it was almost invariably his. At least initially, it was just amazing to see just the different views that I noticed from. This is even before I really started getting into photography, but these pictures were just, there was always just epic. Which really brought me to my photographic era. I started using an Instamatic camera, and then my dad got a small Canon 35mm camera that I started using. And I finally, when I started high school, weeks after I started high school, I bought a Canon AE1, and that's this camera. Let's stop for a moment, and I'm going to show you. So I bought this Canon AE1, and I shot a lot of basically roster shots. It was like 3/4 views, roster shots, learning basic camera techniques, and I started learning darkroom techniques. But it's all really straightforward. It's when I found these magazines, I started trying to learn from these pictures that I saw that just moved me. And here's an example of, I found the notes from the negatives from after I was trying out in the new macro mode of a new lens I got. And my notes said, copies of Richard Steinheimer's Tehachapi and Cohen Pass Revisit articles, actually the Mojave article as well. But this was November 3rd, 1979. So this was an example of how I started learning, just even trying to figure out how to use a macro lens, but I used his photographs to start with. That led to trying to replicate the techniques that I saw in these photographs. In this case, I loved the super telephoto shot on the cover of the Mojave Crossing article. It just gave such a dramatic look. And so I managed to buy I think it was about a $45 Vivitar 2X for my Solagor lens on my Canon AE1, and experimented with how could I get that same sort of perspective. And here's one of my my attempts from 1980. There's another attempt of this angle of, I love this picture showing the shimmering heat from the Mojave Crossing article that Dick did. And I replicated it to some extent on the Santa Fe main line in Lyons, Illinois, not far from where I lived one Saturday morning. Here's another shot where I started learning framing and various techniques. So this is a case where Dick took a helpers in between the code line poles at Summit in Tehachapi, and here I was fighting with the code line poles and the high tension power lines in my area in Lyons, Illinois. And instead of trying to just ignore them or trying to cut them out of the picture, I decided to frame it and use what I learned from Dick's pictures. These are things that, it's interesting, as I've been looking back, scanning my pictures, I immediately have gone back, the pictures that were burned in my brain from so long ago, it immediately popped in my head as to what I was thinking. But it's really interesting for me to even see my thought process here. Before I go on, I want to show you, I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. I want to go to video, and I'm going to show you. Okay, let's see. So this is the Canon AE1. This is the multimodal part of my presentation. So this is the Canon AE1 that I used during that time. I bought it in October 1978, and I wore it out basically. And this is where we need help from experts like Adrienne, because she's going to flip out when she sees these. This is the binder of the negatives that I've been scanning, and you can see the pages are literally disintegrating. And this is some of the pictures I'm going to show you next. These are the negatives from Cajon Pass, August 22nd, 1979. And the pages are just disintegrating. I do have some good notes, but Adrienne, I need your help, because not only are the negative sleeves falling apart, but I can smell Fixer, or the remnants of Fixer and Dectol and Sop Bath. So I'll continue on with the multimodal show, but let me go back to the presentation now. So let's see. Let's see if we can see that. Let me make sure that you can see that. Back to the presentation. So I call this section Cajon Pass Visited. Dick Steinheimer did Cajon Pass Revisited because it was recounting his experiences as a youngster, as a young man exploring Cajon Pass in the days of Shard Walker and Bob Hale and other friends in the 50s and early 60s. In my case, it was my first trip there, and this was on another one of those epic family vacations to Southern California on the train in 1979. And my dad so willingly said, drove us out to Cajon Pass from my aunt's house in the San Gabriel Valley in Southern California. And so we used, this was I was traveling with these photographers like Dick Steinheimer at home by looking at his pictures and trying to replicate those techniques. But this was the first time I was actually in his footsteps in his territory in Cajon Pass, using his Trains magazine as the guide. And shamelessly, I was just trying to replicate I was so thrilled to be there, to see this territory, see the desert, see the Santa Fe shops, and I just replicated each of some of the same pictures. And here, my dad was driving a rental car, pacing alongside along the Santa Fe mainland along Cajon Boulevard, and I managed to get a pan shot. Experimented with some pan shots. Of course, I got a picture of me in the same shot that Dick did of a 3751, which I'm so excited that it's being rebuilt again. And it's at the time standing there, I would have never imagined that train would have moved. So I'm so happy that such dedicated rail fans and preservationists have restored that. Some other pictures over the years that in various magazines in Dick's, both in Cajon Pass Revisited as well as his California in Winter magazine that I found. He shot low light pictures, and this was an opportunity for me to think rather than just perfect lighting, to think what can you do even before dawn. And so this was the first experiments with pushing Tri-X and trying to take early morning pictures. But it was on the way home. We were in Union Station waiting to board the Southwest Limited back to Chicago when I went into the gift shop and I discovered gold. It was a book called Wheels Rolling West by Dave Styffe and Ted Benson. And this book completely changed my perspective on photography. I carried this book around with me everywhere. As you can see, here I am in English class. My friend Paul took this picture. We were both on the school newspaper together, so we always carried our cameras around. But I had this book with me as inspiration. You can see the close-up. It's a little blurry, but you can see the edge of the binding of that book. I have that book right here. I have the book right here, and the binding is literally just falling apart. You can't even read anything on it anymore, but it's falling apart. Not only were there incredible photographs from so many photographers, but there was an entire chapter about Steinheimer. It was like finding gold. I couldn't believe it. And there was the opening picture by Curtis Fukuda, who has now become a good friend, and he took this picture of Dick photographing an SP train at China Wall and Donner Pass, and he titled it "The Master at Work." We're still trying to find that negative after Dick borrowed it for this article, by the way. But on the left is a scan that Shirley recently sent me from you can see, well, this picture was actually used in a Trains magazine article called "The Hill." But the scan is just gorgeous. Even in harsh lighting, it just looks incredible. And you can tell that it was taken within a split second of when Dick took his picture. Dick took the picture on the left, and Curtis took the picture of Dick taking the picture of that. So this chapter and these photographs just were remarkable to me. And it was even more remarkable that years later, Dick and Shirley and I were able to be there together at that same spot. But I'm getting ahead of myself again a little bit. Let me go move forward a little bit. Some of the pictures in this book just completely changed the way I viewed my picture taking. Some of the pictures, there was lighting and composition, and something that really drew my eye were Dick Dorn's glint pictures. I just loved the contrast, and I immediately set out to replicate this. And the picture on the right I took in at the BN Clyde Yard in Cicero, Illinois. Well, right after I got the book, I got home probably weeks later. This picture, this was the first example of where I tried the glint picture. I showed it years later when I got to meet Dick. I showed it to him, and he told me that, oh yes, that Ted Benson jokingly calls it the Dick Dorn Memorial side lighting. And he told me an interesting story that his glint pictures actually came from, his influence actually came from a Steinheimer book I didn't know about at the time called Backwoods Railroads of the West. And so it comes full circle. Ted Benson's also had many pictures in this book, and particularly wide-angle shots inside cabs and low angles. I had the opportunity almost exactly 40 years ago today. It was on April 7th, 1980. My friend Paul and I were in McCook, Illinois, at where the Santa Fe crosses the Indian Harbor Belt. And there was a train stuck there for a long time, and the engineer and fireman invited us up, and I took this picture, thinking of Ted's picture of a crew member in a Western Pacific cab. Another picture that really influenced me was Dick Steinheimer's pan shots of the Southern Pacific commuter trains rolling past his house. He climbed on the roof of his garage and just shot the trains passing by. Shirley later told me that that anytime Dick moved, he always made sure he was within photographic distance of the SP commuter or the SP line in Palo Alto. Ironically, I live right near that. I live 6 blocks from the tracks now. But that was just by sheer happenstance. But in 1981, I was still trying. I'd done some pan shots in Cajon, and I tried panning on the ground, but I didn't have a good vantage point to try to photograph pan shots along the BN main line in Berwyn. So I thought, there's a long passenger platform at the Harlem Avenue train station, and if I ride my bike and I get up to speed, I could pace alongside a train. So here was a Union Pacific run-through freight. There was a lot of run-through locomotives, which gave us a good variety of power. And here I am. I had by this time I switched to Nikon. I had a Nikon FM with a motor drive and a 28mm lens. And I got my 10-speed bike going and set my shutter speed to about a 1/15 of a second. And it's amazing I didn't kill myself. Fortunately, it was in the middle of the day when there was really no passengers on the platform. Otherwise, it wouldn't have worked. But it was an example of how it gave Dick's pictures in this book gave me an opportunity to look at photographing things in a completely different way. Blair Kooistra's articles of Ryegrass and Evergreen in 1979 and the Milwaukee Road in June 1981 directly influenced me as well. Many pictures that I saw of Blair's, and in this case, I was able to photograph what I called the ghost of the Milwaukee Road. This was in the summer of 1981, right after Blair's magazine cover came out, and I managed to photograph this this pair of Milwaukee Road Jeeps going south on the Harbor Belt from the LaGrange Road, from the Ogden Avenue, actually from the Route 66, I believe Route 66 bridge. So you can see yet another example. And so some of these pictures that I'm taking, that I'm showing you, are like the ones in Cajon Pass, or just really duplicates. They're trying to replicate things. In other cases, I'm trying to learn techniques and apply them to my own situation. So obviously, I don't have mountains here. There certainly were a mess of power poles and even a telltale lingering on. There's also looking at various pictures. As I've been scanning pictures, I just look, I immediately, my mind goes back to pictures in magazines. And here, 2 pictures from Dick Steinheimer's Mojave Crossing article again came up, and pictures in Hesperia that I took, as well as in the Santa Fe on the Western Illinois on the right side. Again, it's like just pictures that I saw in magazine. Dick Steinheimer's picture of a wheel with the open journal box when I was photographing a small steam locomotive in Wisconsin Dells. That picture immediately came to my mind. And Dick Dorn's glint shots, I just kept using this idea of different sorts of lighting instead of worrying about photographing in perfect blue skies and getting the sun over my shoulder, looking at how I can capture the tonality and the shading. I also started looking at how could I include people, because I started realizing the pictures that Blair and Dick Dorn and Dick Steinheimer and Ted Benson, they were capturing the people, the railroaders themselves. And so I started trying to see what were they doing. And on the left, you see a crew in Lyons, Illinois, working on the Santa Fe main line, installing welded rail. On the right is at Corwith Yard, where a worker is inspecting a GP40X at the sanding towers. I also had the opportunity to visit the CTC system in Cicero, Illinois, that controlled the BN main line, the Triple Trek Raceway, and borrowed a friend's 16mm wide-angle lens to capture this scene. I also started looking for other opportunities for framing, for patterns, looking to see how I could getting away from the 3/4 shots. I also started shooting more color. These are all Kodachromes from Berwyn, and the one on the lower left is from Naperville. I tried all sorts of different angles, from the, again, more super telephoto shot on the left to the perpendicular kind of 90-degree angle to the tracks, trying to capture the scenes of a typical day as a commute train goes by through Riverside, Illinois. And I also looked for ways to frame my pictures, either from a canopy from a station, or from a crossing signal, or this scene of the Empire Builder going through the Wisconsin Dells with a very, very worn out passenger shelter. So that was the years of when I was about 14 to 15 to 17 years old, were all those pictures I just showed you. And in the ensuing years, I did a lot more photography. I was on the school newspaper in high school, and then I joined the school newspaper in college. But after graduating college with a degree in engineering and working at Bell Labs, it was a Steinheimer calendar. I don't remember which one, but he had many of them, like this one here that I'm showing that was from the Passion for Trains. It was a black and white calendar. On the back, it said, well, if you're interested in photo workshops by Steinheimer, write to this P.O. box. So I did, and never heard anything back. Well, it was several years later, I got an email out of the blue from Shirley saying, hey, are you interested in workshops? And we weren't able to work out any time when he was having a workshop that I could make it to California, because I was still living in Chicago at the time. But in 1998, I emailed and said, hey, I'm coming out to the Bay Area. Does Dick have any time to meet? And she said, yeah, why don't you come up to Sacramento? So I came to Sacramento, and it was amazing to meet Dick and Shirley. And sitting in their kitchen, we talked for must have been an hour or two. And she finally said, why don't you boys go up to the mountains for a couple of days? And I thought, oh my gosh, that would be unbelievable. So we did. We loaded up all my camera gear into Dick's van, and we started driving up the mountains. And on the way there, I thought to myself, I don't really know this person. This could be very awkward, or I wonder how we're going to get along, and if we're just going to get bored with talking about trains. Well, he asked me what I what I did for a living, and I told him that I worked at Bell Labs. And at the time, I was thinking, how am I going to explain to the photographer what Bell Labs is? And he immediately went into talking about semiconductors and radio astronomy and everything, Carl Jansky and all these people from Bell Labs, because I didn't have any idea that he spent years as a commercial photographer in Silicon Valley and knew everything about all this technology. So basically, for 2 days, we didn't shut up. We just talked about so many things, space and Silicon Valley and photography. And here we are at his favorite restaurant called Coffee and, where I've been many times since. This was in July 1988. Let's see, yeah, July 1988, 1998. I'm sorry. We had an incredible time, and we got back to their house after a couple of days in Sacramento. And Dick said, "Oh, that was really fun. You know, it's too bad you don't have time to stay, and we could develop your film and print your pictures in my darkroom." And I still can't imagine why I didn't change my flight, but I said, "No, I have to get home." Well, amazingly, a couple of weeks later, I had another return trip to the Bay Area, and so I called Shirley and I said, "Hey, does Dick have any time to work in the darkroom?" And he said, "Sure." So, well, actually, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me just want to talk about one other thing. So on our trip, this was such an influential magazine, The Hill, where about Donner Pass. There's a couple of pictures in here, of course, at is Stanford Curve, a couple of different names, Horseshoe Bend, it's Coldstream Canyon. Well, these pictures I've highlighted here are exactly where he took me. Well, he took me all over, but we went to exactly the spot. If you notice the tree in the upper picture on the right, you'll see the tree in the right picture that I took in that same spot. But you'll also probably notice this picture he took that's been published in multiple places that he took in 1965. And here's my version in 1998. I got that wrong. It's July 1998. And here I am. He took my picture at Stanford Curve while we were waiting for a train to come. So I had all this film, and amazingly, I was able to come back a couple of weeks later, and we worked in his darkroom. We spent the day making prints on fabulous Kodak double weight paper. It was amazing being in the darkroom together, and again, at the end of the day, he said, "Well, this was really fun." He's like, "You know, I can't really work with Shirley. We have very different styles." And when I told Shirley that, she said, "Oh yes, we have very different styles." But so they each had their own darkroom with their own equipment and their own it supports their own techniques. So we had an amazing time, and because we used double weight paper, when I had to leave, the prints weren't dry yet, so he kept them and dried them, and so he sent them out. I'll switch to my camera again for a moment here, if you'll bear with me. Okay, so this is the envelope that he sent me the pictures, and these are the prints. Including his instructions. He had tips. We'll post this somewhere if possible. Steinheimer's thoughts on printing darkroom, printing black and white. And I love the #1 tip. When in doubt, keep the contrast up. And I found that to be very useful in all situations. Here are my notes from on the back of a spare piece of photographic paper of all the various enlarger settings and enlarging lens and the frames and so forth. And here's the print that I'll show you the details. But so he wrote this note, very nice note, and and this is the picture, one of the best prints that we had. I'll show you the details of that, but in a moment. But so that's the original print, and we made a bunch of other prints here. This was in Donner Pass, and this was actually a negative I shot in Chicago of Milwaukee with 261. I think that was Milwaukee or 261. Anyway, one other tip he shared with me was, let's see if I can show you this. One of the things, if you print in Steinheimer's darkroom, there was a a little artifact in the corner. You can barely see the little blurb, a little glitch of, it was a gap in the corner of his easel. And you can always tell if a print was made by Steinheimer if it has that, if it has that little light escaped and hidden into that little glitch. So it's I'm so incredibly thankful that I have that in my prints. This picture was one print that didn't work out, but what he did is he soaked it and he crinkled it up into a ball and then rolled it out flat and dried it, and it gives you a textured look, which you may or may not be able to tell on here. But it was Adrian is texting me, gloves. You're right. So this is a Steinheimer exclusive textured print. Carefully down. Adrian, I promise I'll get some gloves. It's funny, I had gloves to survive the pandemic, but not damage my my pictures here. See if I can get my mouse back. So these are the what I was just showing you some scans of that, and he said, "Hi Ken, this was a fun session in the darkroom, and the prints look very good. I did use a fine brush with some spot tone number 3 to slightly darken the ballast and ties ahead of the locomotive 3035, where some of the ferrocyanide leaked down from the ditch lights." Oh yeah, that's right. He was teaching me how to use ferrocyanide to brighten the headlights so that it has a little bit more snap to it. Pre-Photoshop. So best Steinheimer. So in the ensuing years, I'm so fortunate. Basically, I joke with Shirley that that I just that they adopted me, and I just didn't go home even before I moved to California a couple of years later. And then since then, I've been very fortunate to have spent a lot of time with Dick and Shirley, and we went on a number of trips together. And one of the most, not only the remarkable thing of getting to know them and getting to know Dave Styffe and Ted Benson and Blair Kooistra and Dick Dorn. I'm just amazed at how my good fortune that I've gotten to know these fine people. But one of the things that I've been so excited about is being able to help Shirley a little bit with Dick's photographic collection and her photographic collection. And as she's been going through and scanning and cataloging these pictures, I always go back to the same picture that Elrond also was talking about, that it was so influential to him. And I said to her, Shirley, if you ever find this picture, I really want to see the original. This was just such a great picture. So one day she goes, "Oh, you mean this?" And she showed me she found the original transparency. It was a 2 1/4 by 2 1/4 transparency, and she said, "Well, I had to get that cable out of the picture." So she digitally removed with Photoshop, and straightened it a little bit and cropped it a little bit to match the cover shot. And then I said, "But there has to be more than just one frame." She found the one frame in an envelope, and then eventually one day she said, "Oh, I think I found what you're looking for." And here was another frame from that same roll. And so the one that I'm holding on the right was removed from the mount to be used on the Trains magazine cover. On the left is the next frame that was still in the original Kodak developed Ektachrome film, and it was labeled Cajon 1974 12,000 ton York Canyon 2.2%. And then in the envelope that it originally had been in. One other thing is Shirley said, "Oh, hey, have you seen this?" And so, you know, when I show you the pictures that I took, that I was trying to duplicate or trying to learn from all of these masters, Shirley showed me this, and she said, "Look at this picture. Here's a picture by Herb Sullivan March 1952 Trains magazine, 22 years before Dick took his picture. And I think it kind of shows that we learn from each other. And I think that I think that's a really great thing, is that we just continue that. We continue learning. We see what resonates with us, and we continue on with that. Move ahead a little bit. One other thing was that the pictures on the left were from the Trains magazine article, Winter in California. And one day Shirley emailed me a picture, and she said, "Have you ever seen this color shot of around Sullivan's Curve?" And I said, "Oh my God, that's such an incredibly gorgeous picture. I've never seen it anywhere." I thought, you know, it's a great vertical shot, but it just looks so fantastic. You can see it must have been at the same time when he was doing the other photographs, the long telephoto that really pulled in the hills behind Sullivan's Curve. It's just this dramatic face of that cliff. And I thought, you know, I wonder if he was planning, instead of the York Canyon coal train, I wonder if this was planning, he was thinking about using this as a cover shot. And so I mocked it up, and I thought, boy, that would have made one heck of a great cover too. So maybe that can be Come Pass revisited again at some point. And I want to just talk a few minutes about some other things that I realized of mutual influences as I got to know Dick and others. So in college, both in high school, as I mentioned, in college, I worked as a news photographer for the school newspaper, and my good friend Nuccio Denuzzo, who I met, who then went on to have an incredible career working for the Chicago Tribune, and now works for Getty. He took this picture of me my senior year of college when I was photographing a sports event with my 300mm Nikkor lens. But the way I actually met Nuccio is not only on the newspaper, but we realized we had a common influence of a photographer named David Hume Kennerly, who won the Pulitzer Prize for his coverage of the Vietnam War. Well, apparently his influence was Joe Rosenthal, who shot the famous picture at Iwo Jima. And that was Dick's instructor at City College of San Francisco. In fact, I remember Dick telling me that he specifically moved from Southern California to San Francisco to go to City College because he wanted to take classes because Joe Rosenthal was teaching there. One of my other influences was Ansel Adams, and I know Dave Styffe worked on his company printing Ansel Adams books and posters. And here's a picture of David Hume Kennerly photographing Ansel Adams. So there is interesting to see just this confluence of mutual influences all together. I'm very fortunate to have had the chance to learn from these photographers from the pages of their magazines and books, and then even more importantly, have become their friends. We had a number of actual travels together. I traveled virtually with them in the pages of their magazines and books, and it transported me photographically, and it was amazing that I was able to travel, particularly with Dick and Shirley. Here's a picture Shirley took of us, one of our last trips in 2003, of a UP train pulling out of a tunnel in Donner Pass. And I have one. I was thinking about this picture. Ted Benson's fantastic book. If you don't have it, you have to get it. Done Honest and True, about Dick's life and his work. There's a great quote in there that Dick told me about too, when he was photographing the West Side Lumber Company at night with his friend Warren Marcus. And here's a quote from the book. I can still hear Dick laughing, telling me this same story. He said, "Warren and I sat on the rocky hillside and talked in total darkness for 4 to 5 hours before the logging train showed up." Now remember, this is with flash bulbs, with hundreds and hundreds of feet of wire, hardwired. He had one chance to get this right with a 4x5. In fact, Dick said he had his 4x5 speed graphic, and he had you can see the star trails. He had the lens open to photograph the star trails and photograph part of it. And then he put the lens cap on and then photographed it with the flash. And he said, "We've been waiting so long that at one point I recall yelling to Warren, 'These are fools, and I don't know which.'" Warren was sitting somewhere above me, and I could hear him chuckling in the darkness. That reminded me of another quote by Steve Jobs, who it turns out that Dick also worked for. I found Dick's credits in Apple publications. Steve Jobs said, "The people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do." And I think that these quotes really go together. And I think that it's these photographers are a little bit crazy in that they really buck the trends. They've not done the same as who came before, even though they've learned from what came before. We all have learned from each other, and there's this lineage of people we learn from in this community. In this community, both this organization and this event continues on that community. And so whether it's online and on websites or in person, I think we should all be a little bit crazy and continuing on change the world. Thanks very much. Anybody have any questions? You want to just
Ken, thank you. And yes, I do have a question.
Yes.
In the picture, the color picture of you and Dick in the diner, are you both about to tuck into an entire pumpkin pie in that shot?
Those are, Dick loved to eat. And that's one thing. And he said, we have to get this. And let me go back to the picture just momentarily. These were pancakes that for a diner called Coffee and there's a lot more and there. Those are gigantic pancakes with whipped cream on top.
Okay, that was Haley's guess. They sure look like pumpkin pie to me.
Yeah, it looks like a pumpkin pie, but it was a gigantic pancakes. Oh, you know, I wanted to actually show a couple of other things. Somebody was asking about cameras. So it was funny that when the first time Dick and I got to Donner Pass, we both pulled out our cameras. We had absolutely exactly the same cameras. We had Nikon F3s with motor drives, and this was a 35 millimeter Nikkor, but we had exactly the same cameras. And I was like, it's not the camera. And then this Bronica that my friend Nuccio had given me when he bought a Hasselblad after he graduated. This is exactly the camera that Dick photographed the Cajon Pass. Actually, many of the pictures throughout the early 70s when he switched from twin lens reflex and 4x5 to he bought a whole Bronica outfit. He had long telephoto lenses and wide angle lenses. And there's a great picture I think that Bruce McGregor took of Dick with this camera. They're sitting on top of a snow shed in Montana. So this is exactly the camera that Dick took that classic picture on the cover of Trains Magazine, the Cajon Pass article. And then this is when I started. I also started using Pentax medium format, and it was this beat up when I got it. So it was. I also continued wearing that out, but. That was a little more part of the show and tell. Oh, and this was the HO, the Ather model that was on my train layout from like 1977, I think.
Well, Ken, we've had a couple more questions come in. Joey Kelf asks, what was the most difficult part about meeting your photographic hero for the first time? Great question.
Amazing. It's interesting getting in touch. As I said, it started with Dick. I sent a letter, and actually Shirley later told me, well, you know, he was the absent-minded professor. He just misplaced your letter for a couple of years. And fortunately, I put my email address on there, which wasn't very common in those days, but Shirley was an early adopter too. And so she emailed me, and I still remember getting this email out of the blue, and I couldn't believe that I was getting an email from Shirley Berman. And so it took a while for us to coordinate times, and I was amazingly able to then meet Dick and Shirley. And then it was at Winter Rail that I met the other great photographers. In fact, I remember I met Ted Benson and Dave Styffe at Dick's. Jeff Browse had arranged he worked with a gallery in Southern California for an exhibit of Dick's work. And I flew out for that in Los Angeles, and I met some of them then, but I really didn't get a chance to talk with them. But it was at Winter Rail. I remember standing with with Ted Benson, and I was telling him just about how. In fact, I showed him that picture of me sitting there with his book, Wheels Rolling West, on my desk in school, and I said, I would love to meet Dave Styffe because this book was just such an influence on me. And Dave said, "Oh, okay. I was waiting to say anything because I didn't know what if you were going to say anything bad about me." So, so I got to meet Dave, and then Dick Dorn and his wife Chris, and then eventually Blair Kooistra and many others, Chard Walker, and just so many great people. And so it was really through Dick and Shirley that I met them. But it's ironic that it was back then, it was so hard. It was much harder to find people than it is now. You find people on Facebook or so many Twitter or whatever, email. It's really much easier, but it was much harder back then.
Howard Pincus has two questions. First, whether you're related to nickel plate historian John Rehor.
No, but everybody asks that, and I've told his son. I've talked to his son, David Rehor, who's also a really great photographer, and I told him, I said, you have to come to one of our center conferences because everybody loves your dad's work.
And then I think I know the answer to this one. Howard also asked, in the shot of Joe Rosenthal's classroom, is that Dick standing at right?
Yes, I'll bring that picture back up too. Yeah, that's Joe on the left with the dunce cap, and it says last class, 87B, the end, June 13th, 1950, Joe Rosenthal. Shirley would know the name. It was Fred Matthews, and there was some of the other people that Dick met that became journalists in the Bay Area. So that's Dick on the right with his with the pattern shirt. And this is on the left is a picture of Joe Rosenthal by David Hume Kennerly, so holding a picture of his classic picture. So.
Well, Ken, again, fantastic presentation. Wonderful way to bring in your influences and fun to see some classic camera gear. I like that we still have a little bit of an analog component to this otherwise all digital show this year. So thank you so much for sharing your work with us. We're going to take a real quick break of about 9 minutes and then reconvene for an on-time start for Gil Bennett's show at the top of the hour. And Gil has some just phenomenal paintings. You will not want to miss that one either. So Ken, thanks a lot, and we'll reconvene shortly.
Thanks, everyone.